Another interesting topic related to the behavioral part of the Amazon interview is that many people try to answer as many questions as possible, and the list is simply too long for such an approach to be feasible. Also, on the same topic, there are Amazon's 14 leadership principles, which can be quite a job if you want to prepare for all of them. So in this video, I'm going to talk about an approach to narrow down the list of possible questions, as well as to focus on the more interesting of the 14 leadership principles. A job description in HR terms is a list of core competencies that the company is looking to incorporate. So during your interview, the job of the interviewer is to test you against these competencies that they previously defined in the job description. So if we manage to reverse engineer the job description for its core competencies, then we'll have a much better idea on what they're looking for in a candidate. And also here important to notice that those core competencies are nothing else than Amazon's 14 leadership principles in this case. So long as we identify them and match them with my list of a few hundred behavioral questions, we'll have a much better idea on what to prepare for. Alright, so the next challenge here is that at the time of shooting this video, there are around 6,500 open SDE roles. And how on earth is possible to take all those roles and extract their core competencies and still give you some accurate advice? Well, it turns out that Amazon somewhat spilled the beans here and allocated a special page to describe the ideal Amazon SDE candidate. At Amazon, we hire the best minds in technology to innovate, build and break things for the benefit of our customers. That intense focus on customers is why we are one of the world's most beloved brands. It's part of our company DNA. Our challenges are big, impacting millions of customers, sellers and developers and countless products, and our path is not always easy. Doing the right thing rarely is, so we're selective about who joins us on this journey. There's a certain kind of person who takes on the challenges of software development at Amazon, someone excited by the idea of owning, people who like to build new platforms, features and services from scratch, developers who can manage the ambiguity and pace of a company whose ship cycles are measured in weeks, not years. Amazon is a place where builders build. Alright, so we determined that these 7 leadership principles are the most relevant when it comes to SDE roles. And even if we only cut those 14 into half, just imagine that it's only half the time it would take you as compared to preparing for all of them. Now, in order to predict what questions you'll be asked during the Amazon interview, I had to match these 7 leadership principles with my list of behavioral questions. And after the first round of matching, I was still left with around 100 such questions. So I went ahead and applied a bit more filtering. I went and did some cross-checks with some other online resources, and I reached a list of about 18 behavioral questions that are the most relevant for SDE roles, and this is regardless of the SDE level. So feel free to pause the video here if you'd like, otherwise they are also mentioned in the video description right next to the like button. Now, what's the best way to answer these questions? Well, it turns out there's one standard technique, that of preparing a few stories for them, because if we take a closer look at that list, there are several categories of questions. There are the ones that can be answered with failure stories, or with success stories, or with teamwork related stories, and there's finally the last category that can be answered with either a success or failure story. So if you prepare 3 types of stories, that is success, failure and teamwork, you'll pretty much be able to future-proof you for these questions. And by the way, if you're applying for an SDE with a higher level, and if you have a lot more work experience, you should ideally prepare two stories for each of this scenario. Now, how do you prepare that story, and what makes a story great? Here it's basically to focus on the why do they ask you such a question in the first place, and try to exploit that as much as possible in your answer. And let me go through each of these 3 types. So for the failure story, why would they ask you for such information? And I believe the best way to explain you this is by telling you about the 2 most common mistakes that people tend to make here. The first one is people spending their 90% of their time to focus on how they made that mistake and how they own that mistake. And the reason why this is not the best approach is because this will put you in a bad light. So you won't look as a great fit for any company if you focus on if you only talk about negative things. And the other common mistake here is that some people tend to sugarcoat it, say, yeah, okay, it was a mistake, but it wasn't that bad of a mistake. And this is again probably an even bigger problem than the first one, because the interview is about yourself, how your life experience, and about your true self, not about what you're trying to be. Now, how do you go about answering these failure stories? Well, you should ideally try to focus on the learnings on the story. So of course you should own your mistakes. You should be very concise and very diplomatic about these things. But the main point here is to focus on your strengths and focus on your learnings from this. And by the way, I did the full example in my previous YouTube video, so go check that out if you want. Now, for the success story, why would I ask you this? Well, to learn more about your strengths. In fact, you could even rephrase this question to tell me about your strengths. Now, what is the best way to structure this question? How do you go about answering it? Let me give you some more specific advice here. First is to make the information that you present quantifiable. So, for instance, don't just say you help to grow traffic to a website. You could just put it like, in a world dominated by monopolies such as Google, Apple, and Microsoft, your team of 5 people helped to grow website traffic by 20% month to month, which generated $1 million in revenue over 2016 alone. So while you should be focusing on your strengths, you should also make sure that you don't look overconfident or you are all smiles all the time, because this could be a sign of nervousness in general. Also, make sure that you keep your answers concise, one at most 2 minutes long. And the main reason for doing this is because your story should be actually the main starting point of a conversation. You should invite for follow-up questions. Are there any buzzwords that you could use, such as AI or machine learning or any other thing that's related with your success story? You could also consider including those. And also the 7 leadership principles that I earlier referenced. Make sure that you use the wording, especially from the description of those 7 leadership principles when giving your story. And my last piece of advice here is to go through your specific position description and look for behaviors that they might be looking in your specific roles. And if you do find such a behavior, make sure that you embed that into pretty much every story that you're preparing. And finally, when it comes to team-related behavioral questions, I believe it's straightforward to understand why they would ask you such questions. And they actually fall into 3 categories. The first one is related with interpersonal skills, that is how well you get along with others and how you handle conflict. The second is about time management and especially how you react to deadlines and how you work under pressure to achieve those deadlines. And last but not least, about subordination. And please don't underestimate this one, because nowadays more and more people are starting their own thing, and you're of little to no value if you tell somebody that, if you tell your own employer that you want to start your own thing right before getting employed there. So you understand what I mean. Now, here is some more specific advice when it comes to answering these questions. Storytelling is particularly important here, especially because it will very much reflect your interpersonal skills and how you work with others. Now, also important here is to act diplomatic. Because think of it this way, diplomats are the best people to handle crisis. So this is how you improve your chances to score better at handling conflict. Own your mistakes or group mistakes. However, just make sure you don't exaggerate with your spending time on this part. And if you happen to tell about such a mistake, such a failure story, be sure to quickly go to the learnings part of this story. Also, do not blame anyone. This is very, very important, because the interview is about you, not about what he said, she said. And finally, put group goals before your own goals, because if you'll read Amazon's 14 leadership principles, and the ownership one is that you should focus on long-term success versus short-term goals. Now, of course, once you have these stories ready, you should go through each one of the 18 behavioral questions that I earlier referenced. And if you'll ever get bored, here's another list with 100 such behavioral questions. So there you go. I hope you found this information useful, and thank you very much for watching.